So welcome to Session BB. It's a conversation about the gap between academia and practice. I have so much look forward to this conversation. I'm Associate Professor of Architecture at FAMU, and it's very dear to my heart, but not only that, it's a passion for our current president, Ms. Beverly Frank. I'd like to bring to your attention that we may not get to all the questions, but there are flyers around the room. So if you will take advantage of those and write your questions in, we'll collect them. I also want to remind you that we want a robust conversation that we can take from and learn and implement, and to begin collaborating with our schools and in support of our schools. So keep that in mind. Before we get started and I introduce the panelists, I'd like to turn over to our president, Ms. Frank. She has an announcement.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Great. Again, thank you for being here. I think this is one of the most important conversations we'll have, and one that we hope to continue. It is absolutely phenomenal that we have all 7 schools represented here from the state of Florida. So can you please give these gentlemen a round of applause? Fantastic. You all have my sincere appreciation. This is fantastic. And all of you are a product of these schools, but it's my presidential prerogative to give out presidential citations, and I've given a few this convention. Very, very well deserved. Do we have any USF Bulls in the room? Yay. So as you all know, I think it's always a battle between who started at USF School of Architecture and Community Design first, but we'll give it to Dan Powers for now. Steve Cook, who is the interim director of USF, is here with me today. And Steve, if you would, I'd like to present this presidential citation for Dan Powers. And Steve, as you're getting up, for many of you, if you went to USF School of Architecture and Community Design, you had Dan Powers for a class. And we all remember he was firm but fair. He just recently retired and literally had every single student that went to the School of Architecture had Dan for a class. So for dedicating his career to architectural education with a focus on practice and forever shaping the profession of architecture in Florida, I'd like to present this presidential citation to Dan Powers.
So like I said, again, welcome to the session about the conversation between academia and the profession. I'd like to introduce our moderator today. It's Ms. Beverly Frank, who is the current president of the Florida Association of American Institute of Architects, and she is the principal of B. Frank Studio. She is an architect whose work spans multiple public universities, municipal, and civic work. Beverly's Tampa Bay-based firm is a minority and woman-owned firm that supports human service programs and leads commercial and institutional projects throughout the state. Beverly is the first-generation Korean American and the first Asian American woman to lead AIA Florida. Joseph Choma, PhD, is the director of the School of Architecture and professor of architecture at the Florida Atlantic University. He is also the founder and director of the Design Topology Lab, an interdisciplinary practice which conducts deep design research and provides consultation relating to material innovation, unconventional means and methods of construction, and the role of geometry in the built environment. If you remember, he made a phenomenal presentation this morning. Mr. Choma. Alan Waters is the Director of Architecture at the University of Central Florida. Professor Waters has taught architecture courses at Valencia College since the inception of the AA Articulated Pre-Major. Throughout his time at Valencia, he has taught all sequences of architectural design, history, and theory courses. In addition to his teaching responsibilities at Valencia, Professor Waters serves as the Architecture Program Chair in the Division of Humanities. Mr. Alan Waters. Andrew Chen, Interim Dean at Florida A&M University School of Architecture and Engineering Technology. Since 1991, he has taught design studios, thesis research, and urban design classes at the University of Florida and the Georgia Institute of Technology, and of course, FAMU. He earned his Bachelor of Design and Master of Architecture for the University of Florida and a Master's of Science in Urban and Regional Planning at Florida State University. Andrew Chen. Rudolph El Khoury is the Dean of the University of Miami School of Architecture. Before coming to UM in July of 2014, he was Canada Research Chair and Director of Urban Design at the University of Toronto, Head of Architecture at California College of the Arts, and Associate Professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, Director of University of Miami. Okay, so try as I might, I practiced this introduction, but my harmonic Southern accent could not do the Spanish inflection. And so I have asked my friend to introduce Mr. Henry Rueda.
Henry Rueda is Chair and Associate Professor at Florida International University, Department of Architecture. Henry started teaching at FIU in 2014. Before that, he taught at la Escuela de Arquitectura y Diseño de la Universidad San José María Vargas, la Escuela de Arquitectura y Urbanismo de la Universidad Central de Venezuela, and also at la Universidad Simón Bolívar in Venezuela. His profession... Yeah, she couldn't have rolled that. Sorry, Rhonda. His professional experience includes working for Jesus Tenreiro in Caracas, Venezuela, and Wild Arts in Maastricht, Holland. His current work focuses on single-family residents in different cities in Venezuela and Miami. In 2014, his VL house was nominated for the Emerging Architects Mies Crown Hall Prize of the Americas, organized by the Illinois Institute of Technology. Let's welcome Henry Rueda.
David Rifkin, Director and Ivan H. Smith Endowed Professor at the University of Florida College of Design, Construction, and Planning. He joined the UF faculty in July of 2021 as the Director of the School of Architecture after 14 years at Florida International University. Trained as an architect and architect historian, David studies urbanism and architecture in Ethiopia from the late 19th century to the present. A practicing designer, David has worked to make environmental stewardship and community development the central focus of architectural practice in South Florida. He's completed a house in South Miami, which served as a model of sustainable construction and environmental stewardship. He is currently working on 2 net zero energy projects. Director David Rifkin. Stephen Arthur Cook, architect and associate professor at USF School of Architecture and Community Design. He teaches architectural design, design theory, and architectural technology courses. His research focus is the care of making, design benevolence, and critical making, the aspect of care given to making events and things. He holds a Bachelor of Design degree in architecture from the University of Florida and a Master of Architecture from the Virginia Polytechnic Institute. Stephen Arthur Cook from USF.
Great, thank you so much for those introductions, Rhonda. I feel privileged to sit here among these esteemed gentlemen. And I would also add Steve Cook is currently serving as the interim director of the School of Architecture and Community Design at USF. And I had the privilege of having him as my thesis chair and a colleague. So thanks for being here, Steve. Before we start, one of the things we did for AIA Florida before this session was we sent out a survey to our members and also to the panel that you see here, and asked just a couple simple questions about the thoughts behind how prepared students may be to enter practice today, and then what the process is like in the universities to prepare students for practice. And we received those responses. So I have a few predetermined questions, if you will, based on that feedback that we received from all of you, from the members. So I think that will lead to a robust conversation. So what we thought we would do is have just a discussion among the panel with some of these questions and responses from them. And as we get the responses, on your chairs, you should have a little form that you can fill out if you have questions, and then hold them up. We'll have people collecting them. But if we run out of time, we still want you to ask any questions you may have of the panelists. We're going to collect them, consolidate them after this symposium, and then give them to all of the schools of architecture, because we want to retain this dialogue moving on. So if you would all do that, we would appreciate it very much. And again, we want to continue this next year, and Elizabeth Camargo, who is our 2025 president, will probably continue this tradition on then. So we really love this relationship between Florida architects, emerging professionals, young architects, and the universities in our state. So with that, the first question I'm going to ask is going to go to David Rifkin. And David, how do you see your institution, the University of Florida, contributing to or shaping the architectural profession?
Thank you for having all of us here. And I would start by saying that within the discipline of architecture, academia serves the profession as a constant moral and ethical motive force, asking questions that the discipline needs to ask, but often is unwilling to, or doesn't have space and time to. And so academia, I think, primarily serves that role. Secondarily, we also are a source of active research in, as you know, in technological fields, like our current work in artificial intelligence and digital fabrication and automation and things like that. But the key thing that we do, it's rooted in the very purpose of a university education. And yes, a university education does provide the useful skills that a graduate needs in order to practice in some discipline, like in our case, architecture. We are NAB accredited, and therefore we have a responsibility to teach the full range of skills expected of a young graduate. But beyond that, and beyond our other service of teaching a quite excellent design curriculum, above all else, we teach our students to be critical thinkers, because the other way that we serve or drive the profession is that we're not just preparing graduates to work in firms in 2023, we're preparing graduates to practice on their own in 2073, in a world that we have difficulty even imagining. So we serve a number of different roles as far as driving the profession forward, but I think it's key to remember that we also ask the questions that professionals are often unable to ask of themselves. And I would just say that the two largest ones are the concerns that we have with a rapidly changing climate that is changing in the wrong direction, and also in the questions of the way in which economic forces drive our society and do not serve all members of society equally. And this is really, I think, the way in which what we do in the academy drives changes in the profession.
Thank you for that great answer. And I will just state, University of Florida, obviously preeminent university, part of the AAU, oldest public university in the state, arguably, and recently joined in the AAU and as a research level 1 institution, University of South Florida. Steve, could you also elaborate on that answer for USF?
We didn't compare notes, but we're close, very close, on about critical thinking and thinking and making. I would add to that, we want to keep the mission clear. And I think it's the mission we all share as architects, educators, and that's excellence and grace. Two things, design excellence, architectural excellence, and also compassionate hearts. If we put those two things together, we'll begin to create change, we'll be inspiring change in our students. So I think, to me, that is one thing. I have a lot of things to say, but I think that's one thing I would like to add, is that we really have to keep the mission clear, that in the end, what is our goal? We want great architecture. We want habitations that are for everybody. We want to have a sense of grace in terms of how we do that. We're concerned about all different individuals and how we provide for them. So I think, we want to keep that mission clear for our students, and they carry that mission with them all the way after school and into the practice. That's my hope,
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. And Alan, I'm gonna turn that question back over to you too. As UCF, we just see how expansive it is, and we're right here in your hometown. How would you answer that question?
I don't know. But first of all, Beverly, I want to thank you for having us here, and I want to thank everybody for coming here today. I think the way I'll answer that question is by telling a story, actually. We are a young program at UCF, about a decade and a half old. But we have a really robust already alumni body that comes out of our program. And so I'm getting to the story. The story I want to tell is just prior to the pandemic, we facilitated 2 field trips for our students. One was to a large performing arts center in town called the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center, which I highly recommend if you haven't been to. And the other one is a very large international airport edition that we had here. And interestingly enough, the people that led the tour of the Dr. Phillips Center and the tour of the International Airport, they were the project managers. They were also graduates of our program at UCF, and they were also graduates of our partner institution, University of Florida City Lab, where they attained their master's degree. And the great thing was they led these tours, and they blew me away with their knowledge and their passion about this craft and how they were imparting it to the students. In fact, I wanted to say during both of those tours, I taught them everything they know, but that's absolutely not true. They were so much better than I ever was or would ever be, and it's a real privilege to not only see those students become practitioners and students just like them become practitioners, but it's also a real privilege for our program to be here in this Central Florida metropolis.
Thank you so much. That was very generous too. Appreciate it. So just to my right, and I have problems with my right and my left, so yes, right. Rudy, from University of Miami standpoint, how do you feel technology is either changing or shaping architectural education? And do you see gaps between technology use through the curriculum and how it is used in practice?
Great. I can speak for hours about this topic, but I'm going to just make 3 points because also I would like to hear what Joseph has to say about this. So one, I want to actually pick up on something that was said this morning when we heard from the Strategic Council about how technology is redrawing the boundaries between the professional fields where construction, architecture, development, property management, they're all starting to blur because they're using the same digital platforms. I think this is a great opportunity here for the profession to actually start to integrate with other fields. And actually, I think we can do more at the university in actually preparing for this integration. So for instance, at the University of Miami, we launched a new program in graduate program in construction management, and we are going in this direction. It's designed to integrate with the design studios where students collaborate in the different fields around student projects using the same technology. So that's one way we can really reshape the profession and the way we rethink what constitutes architectural education. And the other point has to do with research. We see now, because of so many things happening with new technology. We see how the big firms are actually beefing up their own research and development operations to rival the big, research universities. I'm thinking of Gensler, Perkins and Will, and their research departments. Here, I think there's an opportunity also to work with the universities, actually to collaborate on this, with sponsored research at the university. And that's not only possible with the big firms, the smaller ones also can outsource their research and development operations to the university. I can imagine practitioners coming to the university to work on a research team. We talk about lifelong learning. This is a great way actually to do that by being active in high-level research. The third point has to do with entrepreneurship. We were just talking about this. Again, there's so much going on, so much innovation. There is a potential here for the profession and the university to capitalize on this by really cultivating the entrepreneurial spirit. For instance, I was visiting an alum who leads a practice in New York. He told me about how his practice actually encourages the employees to pitch new innovations, new software or new kinds of services, and then the firm invests in those ideas and they spin off startups jointly. So we can do this at the university, cultivate this spirit. Also, for instance, in my own course, which is on embedded technology and the Internet of Things, we ask students to draft a mock patent application. Also, they develop a business plan, and then for the final presentation, they pitch it like in the Shark Tank kind of a scenario. Again, these are three ways, I think, where the technology not only compels us to prepare students for a new professional landscape, but actually invites us to rethink architectural education altogether and the relationship to the profession.
Wonderful. And I think that he was throwing it to you, Dr. Choma.
And again, this is another topic which I could talk about passionately for quite some time. So I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I apologize in advance. One of the first quotes that comes to mind is Rodney Brooks saying, "The way in which a problem is decomposed imposes fundamental constraints on the way in which people attempt to solve that problem." And so if I ask the student to make a model with a series of sticks versus with a sheet of paper versus by writing an algorithm or using AI, each of them are going to change the way they think about approaching that problem or that project or see different opportunities. And just because more technology is being added into our toolbox doesn't mean the other ones go extinct. So they really have to understand learning the workflow and understanding the bias and constraints of each of those. But then, beyond that, it's also technology by itself we have to be very, very critical about the difference between just technology and innovation. So just because something's fabricated with a robotic arm, that doesn't mean it's necessarily innovative. But just because something's fabricated by hand, that doesn't make it obsolete at the same time. And then I think another topic is, so besides being critical about how we're actually making intellectual contributions or meaningful contributions to challenges around the world, it's also about not being afraid of the unknown. Now, we're the first school of architecture in the country to require all of our undergraduate students in the fourth year to learn AI at an advanced level as a requirement for being a professional architect. Because I think there's an ethical obligation to prepare them for the future. It's going to be a ubiquitous tool at some point. And there's going to be many uses of AI, not just one. Most likely there'll be, my colleague Daniel Bolojan has told me, he imagines thousands of AIs that we start to understand how these workflows connect to one another. And so as a result of that, and this is not just using text to image, students are learning how to write algorithms, code, and then they're generating thousands of 3D data sets. Then they're using self-organizing maps to interpolate with that with machine learning. And then from there, they're basically proposing a building from all that workflow. But they're saying, I'm no longer just designing a building, I have to design the workflow. That's a radically different way of thinking about design. Now, is the final output perfect? Doesn't matter. Because they're going to be the ones to shape this future for the profession. And so I've really, as a school, we're We're going deep into it. We're not overthinking it. We're being rigorous about it. But we're not trying to figure out that we have to premeditate exactly what the future of how this technology is going to influence practice. The best way of doing it is like any design project, just try. And that's what we're doing as a school.
What a great answer. And Dr. Choma, I think it's interesting that you talk about workflow, and Rudy, you talked about lifelong learning. And so those are great segues to my question for you, Andrew, and talking about how your program prepares graduates with the professional skills, maybe sometimes called soft skills or essential skills, necessary to enter practice given evolving skills and technologies, specifically helping them to fill the gap in attitudes, including leadership, ethics, self-efficacy, and working collaboratively.
Thanks, Pat. It's funny, when Rhonda first proposed the discussion on bridging the gap, it was almost like she was being asked, that's a problem, that there's this gap, and I think my first response to her was, why is that a problem? Are you surprised there's a gap? And so when you pose that to me, I think of two things. Why is there a problem in the gap? And two, recognizing each of us from our very different schools have different priorities. And I've been thinking about when the title came up about a gap, I'm like, wait, we have these schools that are not the same. Very different priorities. So some are here, 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 here. Not right and wrong, but very different priorities. And we have representatives from offices that have very different priorities. So how can there always be this match? Even if this school and these places have the same priorities, you may be getting kids from this place and that place. I think there's always going to be gaps. Gaps because of where you're getting your talent. Time, schools change, priorities change at different schools. There will be a gap. There's a gap between Major League and Minor League. There's a gap between Live Golf and PGA. There's a gap between all kinds of entities. And I don't feel we feel bad that we don't fit always like this, a bridge. But there'll always be a gap. We hope it's not a canyon, but we shouldn't be concerned with the gap. The gap is different. When I hear, my feeling is our schools are different and provide different opportunities across the state of Florida for students with different conditions. If a student, the priority about, I will tell a student, if you really want to get deep into AI, hey, call Joseph. Maybe that 2-year graduate ought to go over there because that's what he or she wants. All of us have different priorities. Our priority is about access and opportunity. You know, at this place, freshman student, for the first 6 weeks, they don't have to buy anything. We give it to them. Our professional partners, be it HOK, Jacobs, Gensler, they fund. We give them all their supplies in the first 6 or 8 weeks. Why? Because resources like that shouldn't be the difference between picking architecture or being a great architect. It's about hustle and hard work. You just got to put in the grind. It's not who can afford, back in the day, in the dark ages, who could afford the electric eraser? That was high tech, right? Sorry. Today it's other things. It's a gaming laptop. It's who got basswood versus balsa wood. Now we just give them everything in the first 8 weeks and say, now it's up to you. Do your darn work. That's what it takes, hustle and grind. We have our 5th-year degrees now online for that kid from Stark, Naples, Sarasota, Melbourne, who has a 4-year degree and say, I can't quit my job. Or she's a single mom or other things like that. But I think our schools must be different so we can serve the entire state, but also because the students in our context are changing. Our priorities change, they shift with different leadership. So it'd be hard for us to say, here are the 3 soft skills that we must address, and they'll serve everyone, and there won't be a gap. Leadership is good, looking people in the eye when you're talking is good, working in a team is good. But we have other pressures. We got to prep them for the exam, we got performance metrics, we got to take transfer students, we got to graduate them in 4 years. So we all look at all of that, and then we have to look at who are we going to, what should we be doing for that person that starts this August, but is graduating 5 years from now? That's really hard. I think we prioritize different things in our places, but I think we should be fine with the gap, addressing certain and prioritizing certain soft skills. How do they learn the soft skills? Like they learn how to Prisma, like they learn everything else. Practice, doing it in person, but I promise you, they're not going to be experts in 3-4 years. 17, 18 years of bad habits, of not looking people in the eye, being self-centered, not getting along with other people. We're not going to fix it in 3 or 4 years. We'll make them more aware, but we probably won't fix it.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned all of the programs are a little bit different. Henry, what differentiates programs in Florida in general from other schools of architecture, and especially with your international background? And what would make recruiting from your institution in particular attractive to AIA members or member firms?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Probably not.
I can.
All right. Thank you for organizing this, because it's the first time we all get together, all the schools, and I think it's the beginning of something. And I'm really thankful for that. It's a great question for me in the sense of being a practitioner coming from a different context, a different country with different sets of constraints and opportunities. Practicing in Miami or kind of working in a university in academia in South Florida gave me a new set of challenges. Basically, environmental challenges, climate crisis that is obvious in a city like Miami or any other coastal cities in Florida. That, to me, makes a huge difference for everybody who wants to come or have to pick schools in a sort of wide range of options. I came from a place where seismic conditions is something that you need to address daily in your design, since design 1 to design 10, and it's non-existing in our education or in our practice in Florida, which is sort of sets a different kind of mindset and rules. Working in FIU for me had been an incredible opportunity, and I understand sort of our mission of being an arrival college. I mean, people come to South Florida, and especially Miami, and we have this huge responsibility of educating people not just with the skills and the sort of requirements for the profession, but also to place them in a culture that is different than the culture they're coming from. And that is a beautiful opportunity for an educator, and it's also a great sort of social mission of the university, of the institution. The school has invested time, effort, manpower, and money in technology. And after COVID, we're seeing sort of a kind of resurgence of the activities that we had in the school, because everything that was gonna happen kind of got stopped because of COVID. And now we have a very active robotics and digital fabrication lab activities, workshops, and teaching not only our students, but also people from the industry. We're trying to get close to local firms and sort of, as the invitation for this conversation, bridging the gap, because there is certainly different sort of conversations that happen in academia, the conversations that happen in the office, because of time, because of clients, because of money. And in academia, we have sort of responsibilities about critical thinking, like David was saying, but also curiosity. To me, it all begins with fostering curiosity in our students that will lead processes later in technology, in social works, in community engagement. And I think in that sense, Miami or any of the Florida cities have so much potential for people to understand not just the environmental challenges, but also the inequalities, the disproportion, and the opportunities that we have. The sort of the logic of our cities that is all car-driven, and it's all sort of highways based,
the idea of creating citizens, forming people that will live or will create better places to live that are more sustainable, affordable, human, I think it's part of what we do. And I think Florida in general, and I totally agree with Andrew, the strength of the education is that all schools have completely different agendas, or they're different, and events like this will make us stronger as an option for people coming from many places. In the school, we have a new program that's been started 3 years ago of a Doctor of Design program, and it's an online with low residency program that had been very interesting for us because the demographics or the students who are coming are completely different because they're coming from India, from China, from places that are not the population that comes for the MARC. And that had created incredible conversations in class. This last week, we had a conversation in a class that I teach about tropical houses with the students that are from India. And the way they approach the tropics is with the same problems, but it's completely different because it's based on different traditions, different construction techniques, religion, culture. Everything is completely new for our students here. And everything that they were looking at in class is new for them, the way they understand things. So having a school in a city like Miami that is an international place, that brings so many people, that is such an easy sort of gateway to other countries, not only Latin America, but many other places, it's key. And all of our cities receive that influence. Just this morning coming to the airport, the Orlando International Airport is like, coming to JFK. It's like a busy, kind of huge airport. And we have a School of Architecture here now. So Florida, in that sense, to me, is a platform for innovation, it's a platform for research, and it's a platform also for work, because the economy here is kind of a little different than the rest of the U.S. In Miami, there is always a construction boom. Like, there is always a lot of things going on. I did coordinate comprehensive design studios for many years, and at some point we created a program with local firms, and I will take students every Friday to construction sites, and exposing students with developers, clients, general contractors, builders, concrete contractors was incredible. And it was, besides the sort of the liability problems, it was easy because there is so much going on at every scale: buildings, houses, public buildings, public spaces, and that probably won't happen in other states in this country.
Fantastic. It's interesting because you're so close, Dr. Chilma, obviously being in Fort Lauderdale, and I know that you have some thoughts about pedagogical objectives. You've talked about some of those, and ethics, particularly when we deal with AI. And in the media now we hear a lot about the ethics of how AI will be used, but fundamentally architects are licensed for health, safety, and welfare. And how does your program ensure that graduates entering practice understand the value they represent in society and the value of licensure?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to that question. And maybe before I answer the licensure portion and the professionalism portion, we talk about, as licensed architects, life safety, health and well-being, it's fundamental to making a building and to making places for people to live and inhabit. Natural daylighting, fresh air, making opportunities for individuals to walk more in cities. But on the other hand of the spectrum, we are, I feel like I'm probably the worst person right now to answer this, considering I just had an all-nighter last night. I slept for like 45 minutes because I had so many other things to do. We forget about that so many times within our everyday lives. And also within the culture of pedagogy in schools. There was a time when I was a student where it was cool to pull an all-nighter. It's like, oh yeah, I did 2 in a row. It's like, no, that's not good for one's health. It's not good for one's cognition. So on the one hand, we're saying, yeah, we're gonna we're gonna help the world, and on the other hand, we're not taking care of ourselves. And so one of the things we're doing within the School of Architecture is we talk about health and well-being of our students within our faculty meetings, almost every single faculty meeting. You know, mental health, physical health, it's real. When we have more than half of our students working while going to school, understanding expectations and time management is real. You can't tell a student you shouldn't go to work, this is more important. No, that's their means to get a degree. So then what we have to do is we have to teach them time management. We have to teach them to design the way in which they can work, teach them to be efficient, teach them to have certain expectations, teach them to understand how long something might take so they can prepare that ahead of time. And so I don't know, I know there's a lot of parts to this question, but I think that's a part of it that's also often overlooked, and it's really important. Just the health and well-being of our students, as well as practitioners, and how we balance that work-life balance, and understanding how we design time management.
I have to say, as a small business owner, I really appreciate your response, especially time management. I think that's critical, especially for emerging professionals. I'm going to throw out one question to the entire panel and then open it up to questions from the audience. But I'd like to know what we as practitioners and AIA members and AIA Florida can do for you and your institutions. If anybody wants to take that question.
I'll step into it. So one thing that we hear, and not just this week, but in all of my conversations with my alumni, and shout out to all the Gators in the audience and future Gators, right on. One of the things that we hear from everyone, and not just in Florida, but around the country, is that they are desperate for more talent, right? They need more people in their office. Everybody has a lot of work. They want people, and we are, our issue is that 100% of our graduates are employed. We just don't have any more graduates. And we were discussing this earlier as a group. One of the issues that we face, particularly in the public universities, is that while Florida has grown quite considerably, right? It's become the third largest state in the union. The capacity of the schools of architecture has not grown. We are in the same building that we built in 1979. We don't have any more desks than we did back then. And so as a result, we keep producing excellent graduates, but not nearly enough to keep up with the demand from industry. So one thing that we do need to help policymakers understand is that there's a need to expand the schools of architecture, all of them, and not just the ones represented up here, but also our colleagues in the state college system, Miami-Dade College and Palm Beach State College and so on, and Valencia. We need more desks, which means more rooms, obviously, and more faculty. So it's a question of resources.
I mean, I would argue at the next legislative day, your voices, your comments to those key legislatures make a difference. Architecture matters, and they need to know it. They're going to hear it from other lobbyists for their areas, and they also need to hear it from you. We are listed within the performance metrics. The Board of Governors identifies areas of strategic emphasis, certain majors. We are listed as areas of strategic emphasis, our bachelor's degrees and our master's degrees. That's important because that tells the provost and the president our programs matter. So don't be surprised if right about the next legislative day, there's some comment about reminding those decision makers that architecture needs to remain as an undergraduate and graduate area of strategic emphasis. Two, we can only increase the number of licensed architects if they recognize that it matters. And they just need to hear from you. They hear from you, that helps us.
Can you expand on that slightly? Because we touched on this a little bit earlier, and you mentioned some programs that had been taken off of the list of strategic emphasis.
Yeah, so there's a Board of Governors.
And the only reason why I'm asking is because, as an association, we fight this every year, and this has been a particularly difficult year. We have fought for the past 3 years to retain the right to practice.
Yeah.
And the only profession that is protected by the Supreme Court to practice professionally are attorneys. Architects are at the mercy of the state legislature every 2 years, and so we're constantly fighting for our license. So
I think it was great, Henry, for us to finally get together and have a voice is important so we can let you know what we like you to say. Sometimes it's not directly asking for money, but as Ignacio brought up, kind of how PICO funds are defined directly impacts us. The second thing is when you look at architecture programs, one thing we share in common is we say students need a studio desk. And then what does the university say? Okay, when studio ends, what else can we use that classroom for? And we say nothing. Do not use it for anything else. They own that space. And they say, but that's not true in the College of Engineering. That's not true for the history majors, anthropology majors, social sciences. So in some ways, and then we say, oh, by the way, we need our own library. And we need computers labs and technology. And they look at us in certain ways as being not as efficient in terms of producing bachelor's and graduate degrees as other units on campus. So we need to remind them we are important. And that can come by continuing to have architecture on the list. We don't determine who's on the list. On the Board of Governors list of areas of strategic emphasis, bachelor's and master's. So I think we'll take the role and responsibility of making sure that's the narrative, the text is provided to the AIA. So when legislative comes, everyone remembers that architecture matters.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other comments?
I'm wondering if there's a way for the AIA to incentivize internships for our students. Because we have this new internship program where students go to a practice to do research that is led by the practice, and it counts for course credits because it's guided research. So I wonder then if the supervisor in the office can get points, continuing education points for supervising the student in the context of the firm. Anyway, this is one idea, but we need to intensify internships to bridge that gap again, to bring the academy into the profession.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to expand on that because there are different models. I mean, one that we have, I mean, UF and FAU have, is IPAL, the IPAL program, which is a very strong, robust commitment, right? But there are other models, like Gensler has the University Connect, which is an excellent mentorship program for our students. They participate, they get assigned a mentor, they meet on a regular basis that they define between the student and the mentor, and there is no money involved, there is no credits or academic points or anything. It's just, it's a way that that company had reached out to students to provide like a service that is, it's been amazing for us, for our students, and we want to grow in that participation of our students. I was going to say our kids, but our kids with the industry. And it's not always sort of money related. I mean, jobs are great, but there are other figures that we can explore that will help us immensely.
Thank you so much for that. I think we have some questions from the audience.
Yes,
Rhonda?
I have several. We actually have a lot. I think it would be a good idea to share these among the directors.
Sure.
But I grouped them because a lot of them have the same topic, so I'll go first with this first one. So the main gap is the awareness of what are you doing to ensure that students have clear expectations about the profession and architectural practice. A lot of students are disappointed about the field because it isn't what they expected or what they were used to in school. What can you do to help students be more prepared?
Anybody you'd like to field that one?
I'll start with that.
Thank you.
I first of all, I want to say, I can't remember which one of my colleagues up here said it, but I want to wholeheartedly agree that architecture schools, as I'm sure every program, can use more resources, more space, and more full-time faculty. On that note, and I mentioned this earlier, that UCF is very fortunate to be in the location that it's in because we're located in a major metropolis with a robust architecture practice. And many of our classes at UCF are taught by dedicated adjunct faculty who ensure that the students not only are getting the very best in terms of design pedagogy, but also the experience of having a professional practitioner teach that class also exposes them to professional practice while also teaching them how to think as designers. And that experience cannot be understated.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll go. I think first there are some schools of architecture around the world that try very hard to emulate professional practice as close as possible. And there are other schools of architecture that think, oh, if we start with fiction, maybe eventually after we work with science fiction closer, we'll get to reality. So they try to be as far away from practice as they can because they think they need to work in that autonomy to project the future. And it's really, I don't think the academy should ever be exactly the same as practice. We should always be this tension of back and forth. You had mentioned the gap. There should always be this gap. And it's this kind of, because that's how we both advance, how this academia advances, but also how practice advances, by having somewhat of a gap or tension between the two. One of the ways we've been doing that is by using research as the gap between the two, but also working directly with real clients. So this past year, our second-year students did a full-scale design build, and we did it for the nonprofit Women in Distress. So they had to work with an actual client, understand their needs, understand that they are now responsible for executing a deliverable at the highest level of craft because it's going to be used. It's going to actually help a societal problem. Our students working with the Google project, they had to go and then not do a field trip to New York City, but do a business trip where they presented to a board of executives, have conversations with them, which is very different than an architectural review. And then again, they had to have this back and forth feedback where they didn't get to just do whatever they wanted. The clients was driving the project because they had very specific needs and deliverables they needed to have met because it's a real project. You know, they wanted to spend, this is a project that we're launching for them that's $500 million. That's how big that project is. And then the project we're doing with AHF, or AIDS Healthcare Foundation, very similar. When the students are there and the president, Michael, is there, it's a very different soft skill they're learning when they have a president of a company that's like $2.5 billion standing in front of them and listening to them saying, I want to hear your thoughts because I actually want to find a way to fix affordable housing and make an improvement. That's amazing. And I think those kind of soft skills and also literally having real clients, real engagements, breaking that academic silo, looking at real world problems as opportunities, that's the kind of, I think, how we can have this beautiful synergy between the two. But there'll always be a gap. It's never going to be perfect. Yeah. But I think it's perfect when there is a little bit of a gap in tension.
Thank you. And the exposure you're giving us in practice to what you're doing is extremely helpful too. Rhonda, do we have another question?
We do. Could we incorporate teaching the production of construction documents and the understanding behind them?
What is it?
Anyone would like to field that? Do you need the question?
Yes, please.
Rhonda, could you say it a little louder?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Could we incorporate teaching the production of construction documents and the understanding behind them?
In other words, being able to read, interpret, and develop construction documents while in school.
I guess we all do in our curriculum. Yes, we do, and it's I was giving the example before when I was coordinator of Comprehensive Design Studios, which is a required class for the accreditations. So we all have to incorporate that in the class. But we also bring professionals to those studios. Most of the items, like Alan was saying, are licensed architects, the ones who come and teach comprehensive studios, and they come from their practices and they dedicate their time and their knowledge. And also sort of the guests that come to review those projects, redline the drawings. It's probably, as a practitioner, I would love to have more of those studios, but we need to keep a balance in the sort of intellectual sort of construction of the professional also. But we do, and it's probably timid, but it is there.
Part of the reason it's timid is because of different forces. One is accreditation, another is the state of Florida, 120 credits. The accreditation lists about 30 learning outcomes, we would call them performance criteria, that all of our schools must address to be accredited. Only about 5 or 6 have to do with building systems. That's the reality. And then chop that up into structures, HVAC. Okay? Layer on top of that, as the public schools in the state have a certain agreement, expectation, but you see a similar structure. The 4-year experience across these schools is extremely similar. Same number of studios, structures, 3 history classes, and so forth. So, but the state also says you must have 60 credits of general education. We're only left with this much space for architecture courses in that 4-year experience. So that's what chops it down a lot. That's what we share, that's the boundary there. So I would agree with Henri that it's timid, it's there, it's probably not what a lot of people want.
Can I also just make a small comment in addition to that? I completely agree with everything you're saying. And one of the things which is also a reality is you can't just teach comprehensive studio through comprehensive studio. You know, if you do that, then when they draw a wall section, it's just a drawing. It's just a representation. So that's one of the reasons why we're in 2nd year now, which is kind of a strange year to do this. We require all the students to work as a team to do a full-scale design build, where they make a full construction document set, they build it, and then they redline the entire construction document set of 200 drawings. And the reason for that is because then at least when they do wall sections, they don't see it as a static drawing. They understand that it's actually a process. It's actually documenting a way something was made through means and methods, a sequence. When they see that as a sequence of assembly, that's really different way of understanding something comprehensive than just saying, I'm going to make a drawing. And I don't know, so I think, but it takes more than one course. It's not just,
Yeah. Rhonda?
So this is a different perspective. What do you suggest so that students can be proactive in engaging the issue of bridging the gap between school and the profession?
Great question.
I think so too.
No, I didn't hear the question.
Rudy's asking, could you repeat it one more time?
I'm sorry.
It's okay, a little loud.
What do you suggest so that students can be proactive in engaging the issue of bridging the gap between school and the profession?
I love that question because it empowers the students that are here, the emerging professionals. How do they contribute to their own professional development to help bridge the perceived gap?
The students should answer this.
but also the students should be here, right? That's part of it.
Well, that's part
When
of
we
the
see
conversation, sure.
Let's see this. If you're a student, stand up. How many students we have in the room? Excellent.
Don't sit down yet. How many emerging professionals are in the room?
Recent graduates and emerging professionals.
Wow. So would any of you like to field that question? I got the FAU bunch in the front. Do we have a microphone?
Right here, they have to. This is the only one. If you want to come up.
Come on up.
Come on, guys.
Yeah, come on, step up.
Come on. Come on down. Come on. You want my seat?
Is he going to grade you over this?
Absolutely.
Hope not.
Always critiquing.
So
Go ahead.
the question was how
can students be more proactive in engaging this issue? The gap between being in school
Right.
and then moving into the profession.
I think I personally understood the question a little bit differently, but for example, out there we have a booth where we're kind of like advocating for AI and all that and computational design. So we're just, I guess, when you say like bridging the gap, I guess that's what we're trying to empower the firms that are out there that aren't aware about AI. So I guess that's our, what's the word? Our contribution, correct, yeah. I mean, I guess if more students did that, it'd be kind of cool. We all collaborate from different schools and showcase what we're all learning. That'd be, again, pretty cool.
I think that's great. What,
Yeah.
Javi?
silos in academics be a big bridging.
Thank you. I'd like to tack on because these gentlemen in the front row that are from FAU, hopefully all of you have seen their booth, but I would say that there is an entrepreneurial spirit among the students that decided to take the time to come to convention and set up their tables here and demonstrate what you're doing. And I think that partially answers the question for me. But as someone who has both taught and practiced, I will tell you that you're in charge of your own destiny, right? You're ultimately responsible for your professional development, just like and I tell my staff this sometimes, if you're a professional athlete, what do you have to do? You have to condition, you have to train. If you're a musician, you have to practice. So how do you practice your craft? That's not up to your employer, that's up to you and your initiative. So to some extent, that's the bridge between academia and practice. And I would encourage all of you here to do that.
But also to follow the young man's, I think students should tell other students to follow the young man's lead.
Absolutely.
People are looking for someone to step up and come to the mic all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so one, thank you for what you're doing. I think it was extremely hard because someone was asking questions for students to give the answer, and I think it could have been a three-part question. What should the universities do? What should the students do? And what should the practice do to bridge the gap? But I think it's a matter of stepping up and making yourself different from the crowd.
Great. David?
I absolutely agree with Andrew's point. I also wanted to just take issue with the way the question is structured.
Yeah.
One of the problems with the question is that it poses this idea of practice and the academy or education as if they are these homogenous things, and they are clearly not. I see sole practitioners in this room.
Yep.
I see people who work in companies that have 50,000 employees. I see owners reps and one fantastic campus architect. There's all these different ways that there are many practices of architecture, right? And so for the students, there's that. There's also public policy. There's ways that you can act as an advocate or as a community activist. There's so many ways to practice architecture. What you need to do then is find your way to those different things. And within our faculty, we have different faculty members who practice in those different areas and can help push you or guide you. So as far as bridging that gap, one way is to recognize just how diverse the field of architecture is as it's practiced, and then use the expertise of all the faculty members to find your way to the thing that really appeals to you and to your passions.
Good answer.
Hi.
Can I go?
We have one more answer from
Okay.
Henry.
Oh, I was going to say, kind of similar to David, there are so many ways to practice, there are so many ways to participate and be engaged, and I was going to say a couple of things. One, the AIS chapter of FIU, who are all here, and they've been doing sort of an amazing job with our students in school. But I also want to point out, because we look at all the students and the emerging architects, I can't not say that Carl Abbott is here, and he's a legend. He's an architect. He's the youngest person in this room, and I would like to ask for a round of applause because he's sitting right there, and I think it's a privilege to have him here.
Hello.
This lady is brave enough. It was her question, so she has a rebuttal or another.
Bring it.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Lisa Heleno. I'm actually from FIU. I'm here representing AIS. I'm the current chapter president, and I'm also in the IPAL program for FIU. And my question is kind of towards you guys. I know students have their ideas of kind of how to intuitively bridge the gap, but I'm curious if you guys have a different perspective that we can learn from to bridge that gap.
I think somebody mentioned the word advocacy earlier, and I think that's a big deal. I also just want to say as a observation, I know perhaps in the world today there's a lot of angst about what the world will look like in the future. There's a lot of sometimes complaining about the younger generation, 18 to 22-year-olds, but I have to say it's a real privilege to work for 18 to 22-year-olds, and I don't have that fear of what the role will look like in the future, because I think that you all have a lot more strengths than maybe sometimes you recognize. And I want to go back to that word advocacy.
I just wanted to say one thing too, just to your question about bridging these gaps. And again, I would love to hear somebody actually define what those gaps are. Instead, what I would say to you is embrace those gaps and be thankful for them, because if we reduce architecture education to simply being a trade school, to simply telling you how the profession is practiced as it is practiced now, it will leave you completely unprepared for the next shock. I've survived, I think at this point, 5 or 6 major recessions, thank God, without ever getting laid off. And part of it is because I developed early on really strong critical thinking skills. Yes, I had the technical skills. I'm very good at the technical matter of architecture. But above all, I'm adaptable because of what I learned starting in high school, frankly. And those skills are so important, because one of the concerns that the practitioners have here is that there's a gap of, there's just nobody left from that group that graduated in 2008, 2009, the ones who were laid off in huge numbers during the Great Recession. If you're going to be future-proofed against those kinds of shocks, you need to understand that the gaps are here in order for you to learn things that current practitioners don't know, right? That's the knowledge you bring in. That's the value you add to these firms. These old folks, they don't know anything about AI, right? And they're going to need you. They're going to rely on you. But the other thing too is don't let them convince you that the other things that you know to be true are not, right? And what I mean by that is that you have concerns about just the ecological stability of the planet that older folks simply don't. When I say older folks, I mean like my generation, like the Gen Xers. Don't let them convince you that that's a minor part of what we do in architecture, because you are going to be inhabiting a planet long after they do. So that, I would say, that's another one of those gaps. It's something that I think we are more passionate about and more forward about in the academy than in the profession. And together we make a single discipline, but I would say that that's something that you bring with you from your education.
Thank you, David.
Can I add, I just want to, this is a small point, but for me it's a really sharp one. Even some people I've talked to in the hallway, and sometimes colleagues, and I've had to correct them, they're not kids. I can't tolerate someone calling one of my students a kid. They're adults. And I don't even see them as students, I see them as future colleagues and peers. If we call them kids, we're making a new gap. They instantly feel like they're not professionals. If we treat them as colleagues, as peers, as future licensed architects who are going to shape this world, and we give them that respect day one, and we talk to them that way, it changes the mentality and it kind of empowers them, I believe. So, just that's one little thing, but I've heard so many times, both, casually colleagues as well as casually in the hallway, people walked up saying, calling them kids. They are not kids. They are adults and future professionals of our field.
We have thank you so much, Dr. Choma. We have a question in the audience.
Well, instead of a question, this is more of an additive comment to what you guys have already preferred here. As a professional student, there's a unique kind of in-between place that I've occupied in working as a practitioner and then working as a PhD student and teaching students. And so what I found, what I wanted to add here was, I believe the potency of mentorship can really kind of bridge this space that's being discussed here, specifically with students taking the initiative to go after mentors that are multi-generational. So for example, in my case, I had the opportunity to have a mentor who was a retired architect, a mentor who was a practicing architect, and obviously IDP supervisors at the time because I was working. However, having a spectrum of experiences to draw from allowed me, when I was struggling with construction documents on a $90 million project, to get perspective from somebody who had worked for 30 years working on institutional work and things to, whether it was a checklist or whatever the kind of practical things that they didn't need to be taught to me at school because I needed to, like you guys mentioned, learned about critical thinking and interpretation. So I would just simply add that I think there's a potency to mentorship. It's part of kind of AIA principles anyway, to have that. And since architecture being a business of people is really about those interrelationships, then it seems like it would be ideal for students to begin to understand that building relationships outside of the direct employment relationship can really help to soften the blow of going into the profession and recognizing that you're a part of a team instead of the lead designer in some of these cases, and you need to be able to hear and listen and just kind of relate to people through architecture.
Thanks for that input, Joshua.
That's a great segue into this next question. Would your program consider implementing a required 1 or 2 semesters that students must work in a professional office to gain the initial experience of what really happens in an office?
No.
Anybody?
No. Why? Because there is a certain town, I don't want to talk about places, that requires certain students to register for a course and not get paid, but have a required internship. So certain offices think that's a great thing, but guess what? If certain people can get students to do work for free, they're not going to hire all these other students. So on one hand, when you say require students to work in an office.
Here's what I found.
Wow, not that. If you say require students to work in an office, if they're required to work in an office and they're in a course and they're getting paid, can they get AXP hours? I don't think so. I don't think you can double dip.
Yes, they can.
So we're requiring them to take a class. Who defines what they do in that class? Their boss? So I'm just.
I'm the one who posed the question.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they would work for free, but basically they would take a semester. There are some universities that run that say you take that semester off and you go and you work in an office and get paid.
Yes, so working in an office is great. I think that's a great experience. But those 3 credits or 6 credits must meet certain learning outcomes.
You do. You get experience. You go get a job. You start out having some knowledge of how a building goes together. Every student I hire that comes out of college does not know what they're doing. They have all the intellect, they have all the design capabilities, but they have no idea how a building goes together. And that's how you need to do it.
Go on.
Doesn't the IPAL program address that?
IPAL is not. So the point I'm trying to highlight is that we have to be held accountable for the person that teaches that class, the learning content within that class, and it's often more complex than the simple things of saying, go work, get paid, it'll be okay. It's a good thing. I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I'm saying students will learn a lot outside the classroom versus inside the classroom. And I encourage students, that's what your summers or dual enrollment or your online courses allow those opportunities. So I'm not saying it's not a good thing, and I'm not saying they'll learn a lot from you that I won't be able to teach them. I'm just also saying the bureaucracy of education at the public school in Florida, accreditation from NAB requirements, and also SACS often make what individuals think is pretty easy a lot harder or not even possible.
I think this is a good point to reference that. I know within AIA Florida, we've had discussions about bringing this up and actually even had this conversation with Kimberly Dowdell yesterday at lunch. How we can build better relationships between ACSA, NAB, NCARB, AIA, and AIAS to redefine what that criteria is so that opportunities like that become more readily integrated into the process than they can be now because of the way the process currently works. So thank you so much for your answer, and thank you, Lourdes, for the question.
Okay. I'm going to do one
more
last question because
Thank you.
we have to get ready for the Design Awards ceremony. So here you go.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to make this 3 real quick things. Number 1, Lourdes, to answer your question, NAB and NCARB do not see eye to eye on the issue. It's a constant conversation in some of the committees. There's a conversation about college credit versus payment versus AXP credit, and you can have 2 of the 3, but you can never have all 3. Joseph, thank you for the comment about calling them kids. I'm as guilty of it myself as everyone else, and you are absolutely right, so thank you for calling us all out on it. And to the whole panel, guys, NCARB and NAB did a very good study about the gaps that are being talked about. So if any of you want the hard data, I'd be happy to provide any of you with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you all for coming. And again, this panel, this is just the beginning of more robust conversation to come. The fact that we're all here together is wonderful. I appreciate all of you accepting the invitation, and a big round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you,